the giving of the Torah and many of the events, and they were enacted, like I say, by the Chazal, the Chachomim, meaning the sages of Israel. So they have somewhat of a different status. For me, it's much more difficult for me to speak on a Chag than it is to speak on standard Hashkafa. You may say, why is that? That's because when you talk about a Chag Amor, you talk about certain types of historical events. When I have to get up here and I have to talk about these things, I can't just simply speak about some simple ideas about a menorah and they lit the candles and there was a miracle and this and that and so on. In order to really understand Hanukkah, you have to understand something about the historical events that took place at the time, because that's the whole meaning of the thing. But to understand historical events is a very, very difficult thing. Why? Because to understand historical events means that you must understand the mechanism of history. You have to understand why things happen the way they do to begin with. So you have to really kind of abstract yourself from the world and connect yourself to all of world history. That's why it's much more difficult. Now, you can do that, but you have to have certain basic ideas. You have to have fundamental principles and concepts, which a lot of people are not familiar with. That's why I normally leave the explanation or the analysis of the Hagim always to the end. And if you'll notice in the list of tapes that you all have, Hanukkah is Series 5, Tape 8. That's right. All of the Yom are in the 5th series. And you say, well, they should be in the 1st series. No. Because you really can't begin to understand Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hanukkah, and Purim, and Pesach until you really have a very strong hold or conception of the basic principles of Hashkafa. So what I'm going to do is, in order to do this, I'm going to make somewhat of a compromise, and I'm going to speak about these things, and I will leave out certain materials that have been discussed on the tape itself. We'll get into that later on. Okay, what is Hanukkah? Well, let's understand something about the history of Hanukkah itself. What happened? What really happened? Let's kind of give a bird's eye view of the history of the Jewish people at that time and so on before. In the 5th century BCE, there existed the first temple, the Beit HaMikdash, the first one. Now, the first temple was exemplified by certain specific things. There were many miracles that were obvious at that time. There were many prophets that lived in Israel at that time. And like I said, at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the first Bayis-Rishon. If you don't understand the Hebrew word that I say, please just raise your hand and just ask. Don't be afraid and don't be ashamed. Bayis-Rishon is the first temple, the first Commonwealth, as they call it, and there were many prophets. There were over 1 million Nevi'im at that time. And Klal Yisrael was a very high state. See, the Jews obviously, even though they were in a very high state, were also in a very low state, because with respect to the state that they were, they did not do what they were supposed to be doing for their purpose, for their tikkun, for their purpose. So, and they were evil in different ways. Now, what constituted their evilness is very different than what constitutes our evilness. And to draw comparative analysis from one generation to another requires a great deal of understanding about what constitutes the nature of human experience, the subtleties between the Yetzer and the Yetzer, and the certain basic pivotal rearrangements, structural rearrangements in history itself. But basically, what you find then was that Klal Yisrael at that time did not keep the Torah the way they were supposed to at that madrega, at that level. I'm not going to go into that because that's not really germane to our discussion here. But suffice to say that that's really what it was. So what the Banishim did was, he sent Babylon and the Chaldeans, who had just arisen. Babylonia was not a long-term nation. They were not a nation that existed for a very long period of time. They arose maybe 100, 200 years before, and they became a very mighty kingdom. They had conquered the Assyrians, who lived about 200 years before, in the 7th century, and who took away the 10 tribes. They went on to Israel, and what they did was they conquered the kingdom of Israel, and they swallowed up the 10 tribes. They literally took them out of Israel, the land of Israel, and they brought them where, when, how, no one knows to this day. And that's what we refer to as the 10 lost tribes. And a short while later, about 100, 200 years later, Babylonia became very strong under Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar in English, Nebuchadnezzar, and he conquered the Assyrians. And essentially Assyria just went out of existence. It's a very strange concept. We don't really find that. It's a very strange concept in the ancients that you find a nation being very powerful for a certain period of time, and then when they lose their power, they literally lose their existence. You see. Assyria, it was a very powerful nation, a world power, and that was the end of Assyria. You never really heard of it after that. What you find today, even though nations go up and down in power, they don't literally lose their existence, like France, England. These were once very powerful nations. Well, to some extent they retain their power today. But England in the 17th, 18th century was enormously powerful. France, let's say, in the 14th, 15th, Spain in the 13th and 14th were very great countries. But after that, once they lost world domination, they kind of receded into an area of world kind of a inferior position, but they remained. Spain is around, France is around, England is around, you see. Whereas in the ancients, you don't find like that. It seems to be one kingdom just went up and then it went out, and it literally went in and went out, not up and down. Assyria, Babylonia, Persia, Greece, Rome. You don't hear these kings, they don't exist anymore as such. So this is just a very interesting phenomena, and what happened in the year 586, specifically, BCE, before the common era, that's our equivalent to the Gentile BC. We don't say BC, we say BCE. 586, the Babylonians came in and they conquered Israel and they destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. This was obviously an enormous catastrophe which we commemorate in Tisha B'Av, and the meaning of that and the whole event of that is a whole different discussion. The subjugation of Babylonia lasted only for a short period of time. It lasted, well, not really that long. And they were very shortly thereafter conquered. Nebuchadnezzar was conquered shortly thereafter by Persia and Media. It was called the Persians and the Medes. So we call it Persia. And they conquered Babylonia, and that was the end of Babylonia. I think the last one of Babylonia was Ashurbanipal. I think the sons of Nebuchadnezzar, and that was the end of it. Persia took over, and you had Darius, Xerxes, Cyrus, and so on, Cambyses. You had a whole different set of kingdoms, and what it was that Persia became the mightiest nation on earth. No nation on the world had ever achieved what Persia achieved, not even the ancient Greeks, who in their times were the world dominators. And under Cambyses, Persia was so powerful that their kingdom extended all the way up to India, you see. And this kingdom was only later on duplicated by Greece under Alexander and by Rome under the Caesars. But the first one to really have world domination was Persia. And they destroyed the Babylonians, you see, and they arose, and the whole period of Purim takes place in the period between Babylonia and Persia, you see. Between the period 586 to the period about 515 was the whole story of Purim. That's where it takes place. And under Cyrus, in, approximately, let's say 520, actually 515, Cyrus says to the Jews, I'll let you go back to Israel, and you can rebuild your temple. Cyrus gave permission to the Jews to rebuild the temple, and they went back with Ezra and Nehemiah, and they rebuilt the Beit HaMikdash. That was the second Beit HaMikdash, which was totally different than the first. And the second one, first of all, there was no more Shekhinah anymore. You did not experience the power of the Baruch Shem. The presence of Kedusha was no longer there. The ark, the ark was inside inside the temple was gone. Many things were gone. The tomb were gone. Most of the things which characterized the miraculous quality of the Beit HaMikdash were gone. So that the second Beit HaMikdash was quite an incredible step down. But in any case, many Jews returned and they built the second Beit HaMikdash, and they lived for quite a number of years after that. And we found ourselves going through history, and Persia lasted for another 200 years. Not a bad job for an ancient kingdom, until they finally were taken over by Greece under Alexander in something in the year, let's say 320 BCE. Okay, so the last 20 years they conquered most of the known world. Alexander of Macedon became very powerful at that time, and he had great wars with the Persians. I think the wars, the Peloponnesian. No, that was Sparta. I forget the name of the wars between Persia and Greece, and Greece won. Well, Greece won, that was the end of Persia. And what you find was that Greece under Alexander took over the entire Persian kingdom. And of course the Jews were in Israel at that time, so they became subjugated by the Greeks after this. Now, in terms of the Greeks themselves, Alexander lived a very short life. He died at 33 years old, which is an astonishing thing. Imagine 33-year-old man conquered the entire known world. That's how old he was. He died at 33 years old. It's incredible. Some of us don't even get off the ground until we're 33. And he's already finished. I mean, that's just really something. That's called Hatzlacha. Anyway, that's what he did. He went ahead and he conquered the world, and then he finished it, and then he went there and died. I guess that was the next step. And his kingdom was divided into 3 steps. Into 3 sections. It was divided into the Egyptian section under Ptolemies, and that started the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Greece itself. And then in the area of Syria and Judea, it was given dominion over to what's called the Syrian Greeks. And the dynasty became known as the Seleucid dynasty. So the kingdom of Greece under the Grecian, the Alexandrian domination of the world, after his death, divided into 3 sections. You know, no one man was able to fill his shoes. And we find it dividing into 3 sections, finally coming to the 3rd section, the Syrian Greek section, under what's called the Seleucid dynasty. And that dynasty lasted for quite a while. And we find ourselves finally in the year of about 170 BCE in the Seleucids, under a king. His name is Antiochus, or Antiochus in Hebrew. Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus. He was a very cruel king. He was an incredibly cruel person. And what he basically said was that he was a Greek in tradition. And if you know anything about the Greeks, the Grecian tradition is very interesting. The Grecian tradition is called the Hellenists. And essentially they believed in certain things, and they had a certain mythology of their own. They established certain basic arts and sciences. And what Antiochus did was he said to the Jews and to all the people of the kingdom, I don't want a kingdom of many different religions, I want a kingdom of one religion. I feel that it's an important unifying factor. So I want one religion, and what I want to do is I want you all to worship the Grecian religion under the divine worship of Zeus. So what he went ahead and did, he put a statue of Zeus in the Beis HaMikdash. And he told the Jews that they cannot learn Torah anymore or have anything to do with Torah, but they must worship this religion and the Hellenistic doctrine itself. The Jews rebelled under Mattityahu, who was the high priest. He rebelled, and he said, we won't do it. And he and his son, Yehuda Maccabeus, and his brothers went ahead and formed an army, and they battled Antiochus for 2 to 3 years. And they won. And they beat him. He was killed, Antiochus was killed, which is an incredible thing. And they overthrew the Seleucid dynasty, and they restored the Beis HaMikdash, and they restored the kingdom of Israel for many, many years later until Rome came about. So this is essentially some of the basic historical events that we're talking about. It's important to get a perspective of what happened. So when we talk about Hanukkah, we're talking about this area of history at 170 BC, a long time after, 400 years after the destruction of the first temple, Babylonian, Persia, Greece, and then finally the Seleucid dynasty, a section of Greece. Now Rome was just beginning to become a very strong kingdom in 170. It was just beginning, you see, before there was only the Etruscans and now the Romans. They were slowly marshalling their forces. And of course, in maybe another 100 years or so, they would begin to dominate the entire ancient world. Hanukkah therefore constitutes a very small segment of Jewish history, yet obviously was very important. Chazal, like I said, the Chachamim, the sages of Israel, enacted a complete moed, the holiday, festival, for the events that happened. And we ask ourselves, what happened? What are they celebrating, essentially? And what the Torah tells us in the Tefillah, in Ala Nitzim, which you say on Shemon Esrei, during the 8 days of Hanukkah, and essentially what the Ala Nitzim says is that the Syrian Greeks attempted to make them forget the Torah, and to return them away from the will of God. And what the Bonisham did was that you in your abundant mercy stood by them in their time of distress, you defended their cause, you judged their grievances, and then you avenged them. Now it doesn't think you delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak. You gave great warriors into the hands of weak warriors. Weak warriors. And the many in the hands of the few. And the many into the hands of the few. The impure into the hands of the pure, and evil men into the hands of the righteous. Now, this is a very big thing here. And then it says at the end, and because of this, and he designated these are what happens, and then your sons entered the Holy of Holies, and they cleaned the temple, and they purified the sanctuary, and therefore we designate these 8 days of Hanukkah to thank and praise your name. Now, what really happened? There was a battle, number one, and then at the end of the battle, the Jews went into the Beis HaMikdash, which was laid quite dormant for quite a while and was under a lot of destruction, and they wanted to rekindle the menorah. The menorah was a certain instrument in the Beis HaMikdash. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It was like a candelabra, a huge candelabra, and what they wanted to do was rekindle it, but in order to light the menorah, you have to use oil which is toho, which is pure. You're not allowed to use oil which is tamei, which has been defiled. And in order to know oil which was defiled from that which is not, they kept it in casks. And there was a seal on the cask, which means that it had never been opened and never defiled. And what it was, they found only one pach, they found only one cask with a seal on it, which means that essentially they had enough oil to burn one day. Now they needed really 8 days in which to make new oil. That means that once they started lighting the menorah, which is the chiv, as soon as they came to Beis HaMikdash, essentially it would burn out after the first day, and the 7 days they would have nothing, and they would have to wait until they could get new oil, the tahara, which was pure, without tamei. So I guess that's what they did. That's the best that they could do when they lit the menorah. And suddenly they found that the menorah with that one cask lasted an 8 full days until they had enough oil on their own. See, this was an unexpected event. You see, now this is obviously a miracle. Here you have You have a menorah burning on one cask of oil for 8 days. When the amount of oil could only sustain that kind of combustion for 1 day. This was a nace. Now, Al HaMiktam, which is the tefillah that we say in Hanukkah, doesn't mention that at all. It doesn't say anything about the 8 days and the miracles and lights, which is the main thing that we do, right? What do? We light lights. 1 the first day, 2, 3, 4, and so on. To signify that what happened on Hanukkah, each day there was another miracle. The first day there was no miracle, but the second, third, and fourth day there was a miracle of light, because each day we had light when we shouldn't have had any at all. So this was the miracle of Hanukkah. Yes, the tefillah doesn't mention it all. All it says is that what happened was that there was a war, and God gave the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, and the Chachamim were massacring this to commemorate these 8 days. And that's the end of it, which is a very strange thing. The whole net of Hanukkah, the way we understand it, is the miracle of the lights. And yet that's not mentioned at all. This is an interesting problem, you see. Almost seem to indicate that the names of Hanukkah, the lights, are of minor importance. Minor importance. Not of major importance. Why is that? Number one. And number two, what is the big deal about Hanukkah? There were many battles of the Jews with Goyim. The Jews battled the Goyim, God knows how many times. Many times they lost, but there were times they won. What's the special occasion over here? Especially when you're not going to recognize the miracle of the light. If you're not going to recognize that, and you're going to consider that a minor aspect of the event, and you're going to focus on the battle, on the conflict, so then what's the whole hullabaloo here? That we make a whole new chag because of Hanukkah. So if you really think about it, Hanukkah is a very problematic chag. It's not that superficial, simple chag that we all think, and so on. Obviously, there's something else totally different from what we're really knowledgeable about. And I'd like to talk about that. You know, to talk about Hanukkah, you really have to ask a much more deeper question. And you know what that question is? Why do we celebrate any Chagim at all? Why do we have Ma'adim? Why do we have them? Well, you say, well, every religion has holidays. That's ridiculous. We mean every religion has holidays. It's not ceremonial religion. You see, it's Mitzrayim, the Exodus of Egypt. Why are we celebrating the Exodus of Egypt? You know how many years that happened? You know how many years ago that happened? That's 3,000 years ago. Why are we celebrating something which happened 3,000 years ago? What does it do for me? And why should I be concerned with the fact that my ancient forefathers went out of Egypt? Tishba, Beit HaMikdash was destroyed 2,500 years ago, and 2,000 years ago. It's a long time ago. Why am I so concerned about that? I have a lot of other things to worry about. Wouldn't you all agree? There's a lot of other things in your life that are probably much more vital than worrying about something that happened 2,500 years ago. Sukkot. We commemorate the fact that in the Midbar, well, we slept in booths in the desert and so on. Again, it relates to the 40 years in the Midbar. Why am I concerned about it? Sure, I can understand. It was giving of the Torah. What, we learn the Torah now, so that's important. You know, we celebrate the origin of this, the way we were formed as a nation. But the other things are not important. Purim took place when? At this time here, about 2,500 years ago, it was a small thing, and Purim wasn't even named. Purim was a story between Haman and Mordechai, where Haman was plotting to kill the Jewish people, and Mordechai was with him. Sharp guy. But that's it. It's a nice story. It should end there. There are many situations like that. What's the big deal of Purim? When you really think about it, celebrating holidays, commemorating something is really somewhat a strange affair. It really makes little sense. But we have holidays in the American culture. We have 4th of July. We celebrate our independence. Right? We have many other days and so on. Armistice Day, and Veterans, whatever the story is, Thanksgiving Day and so on. Thanksgiving Day, okay, we celebrate what? The fact that the Pilgrims came and they had, they really were not clear and they were able to build something, so we all eat, well, not all of us, but at least the American culture has the concept that eat your turkey and eat your cranberry sauce. And they kind of, feel good about yourself. But what is that? That's a commemoration of a historical event. Is that what's going on? Is that what Judaism is about? Is that what Chag is about? Is it a commemoration of a historical event? No. It has nothing to do with historical events. Believe me, there are thousands of historical events that we can commemorate. And Chazal never looked at them. Why does Chazal concentrate on this historical event? The answer is because a Chag, in its essence, has absolutely nothing to do with a historical event. And that's a very, very important thing to know. If you know anything about the Chagim, we do not commemorate anything. We do not celebrate anything. Even our New Year's has nothing to do with a celebration. On Rosh Hashanah, we do not get into song and dance and wine. That's not what New Year's is about. On Rosh Hashanah, we go to shul and we get to Mispal and Bonus Shalom, you see. And we begin to worry about what the next year is going to look like, you see. It's not, and that's in essence what it is. The same thing with the other Chagim. What then is the purpose of a Chag if it has nothing to do with commemoration? Well, you have to introduce a very important idea. And I'm going to explain the idea to some extent because, like I say, it's really an advanced idea. It symbolizes the word is called tikkun. I don't know who has heard the word before. Some of you have, some of you haven't. Tikkun comes from the word misaken. It means to fix, to correct, to re-establish. To misaken, to fix something. If something is broken, you fix it. Or else you make it better. You perfect it. You see. All of history is nothing more than the experience of the Jews at different successive stages of perfection. Tikkunim, you see. When the Jews left Egypt, when they left Mitzrayim, what happened? It was more than just the historical event that they went out of Mitzrayim, and there was an incredible thing that happened. But that historical event was able to take place because Klal Yisrael had reached a certain level of spirituality. It is not the historical event which is critical. It's the fact that the historical event is an indication. It is a barometer of a much more fundamental achievement in the very spiritual process of creation of history itself. Historical events are no more reflections than things which are actually going on underneath. And what are the things that are going on underneath that concerns the Bnei Shalom? Where are the Jews holding in terms of the Yemot Mashiach, their ultimate state of perfection, Olam Haba, and the perfection of their souls? That's what worries God. Not that He's worried, but what concerns the Bnei Shalom is that. I'm not concerned with what good time you're having. I'm concerned with where are you holding in your madrega? Where are you holding in your level of perfection? You see, what level of tikkun have you established in terms of your spirituality, your ruchnius, your neshama? You see, and depending on that, that's how I will determine the historical events which will happen to you. The reason why the Jews went out of Egypt at that time because they were finally merited. They were zeicher to it. They couldn't go out 10 minutes before that time. Long before, quite a number of years, I think several decades before, the Jews went out of Egypt. The tribe of Ephraim had calculated that they thought that now was the time to leave Egypt. They thought that we finally reached the Madrega, finally reached the spiritual level when we finally can merit to go out. We can battle. You see, the forces against us, the spiritual forces against us, which keep us in Islam, and we can leave. So the other Jews, many of the Chacham said, don't, it's not the time yet. You cannot do it. So they went out on their own. They went out on their own, and they left Egypt. They were able to get out, because they were in Goshen, in the east, northeast, and they were able to get out, but on the way they met other nations, and they battled with them, and they all were wiped out. It was not the time. What does that mean it wasn't the time? The time for what? It was not the time of the spiritual perfection. They had not reached the Madrega of Tikkun. So therefore, the Madrega of a Jew at any point in time tells you what's going to happen to you. 5 minutes later, if we can understand the mechanism of history itself, and we can assess your ticket at any point in time, you can really predict what will happen to you the next day. Almost exactly. That's right. It is literally a science. The Hashgacha is an exact mechanism. It simply waits for your input. God waits to see what you're going to do, how you will choose. As soon as it's established, an instant you set up a chain of events that begin to mold and shape history and determine each day what will happen to you, and on a national level, what will happen to the Jews, and on a world level, what will happen to all of Klal Yisrael, and on a cosmic level, what will happen to all of creation itself. That's how it goes, from the individual, to the nation, to the world, to all of creation, you see. And it starts from the person. Each person shifts into gear and moves the process. And suddenly, it's automatic from then on. You can no longer stop really the events in which you start. You see, you input and the mechanism takes over. It's like once you program a certain machine or robot to do something, it's on its own. And it will work on its own for a certain period of time until it again needs your input. That's what history is all about. Hence, historical events are the reflections of the more internal spiritual events, which are really invisible. Hence, we don't celebrate Hanukkah. We're not concerned with the fact that a bunch of Jews got together and wiped out Antiochus. That's not what concerns us. What concerns us is that the Jews at that point in time were able to wipe out Antiochus. Because the fact that Antiochus was able to conquer the Jews was what? Was an indication that the Jews had reached a very low level. Or why would God send Antiochus on top of them? God doesn't punish them for nothing. God doesn't give them swords for nothing. He gives them swords because in some way they have defaulted on the Tikkun. Hence it is now their job to remove it. And Hanukkah was the indication that the default was paid or removed. You see. Hence what we're concerned with is not the historical events, but the Tikkun. What happened at that time in terms of the spiritual process that allowed Hanukkah to be in the first place. Sounds good. So what are we saying? So what are we celebrating then? A Tikkun? Why do I care about a Tikkun? They're both a history. What's the difference if it's a historical event or a Tikkun event? It's something that happened a long time ago. Why am I concerned with the Tikkunim that happened 2,500 years ago? We'll go back to where we started from. You see, I haven't answered anything. All I've done is shifted the question to a different plane. That's all. History is history, whether it's an event or it's a Tikkun. I don't care if you talk about the external event or the internal event. It's still something which is past. So why do I celebrate Hanukkah now? The answer to that is the essence of what a Chag is. And what is that? There's a very strange thing about Chagim, and this is what the Rebbeinu did. The Rebbeinu said the following in the Torah. The Rebbeinu said, at different points in history, Klal Yisrael reaches a certain Madrega of Tikkun, and because of that, they are able to establish a certain ascendancy, certain Yeshua, certain redemption. Now, what happens is, they can lose those redemptions, and they can go back down again. But the Rebbeinu said, even though they go back down, I will not allow that light, that new light that was brought down on Tikkun, to be totally erased. I will not allow it. And what will happen is, I will allow you to bring down that light every year again, and to redo the same thing you did then, even though those historical events are no more in effect. That's what a Chag is. When the Rebbeinu said, I want you to keep Pesach every year in order to what? To celebrate the Inyan of Pesach or Yetzias Mitzrayim. We don't care about the historical event of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're not even concerned about the inner tikkun, the fact that the Jews reached the Gula of redemption. What we are concerned is that life is still available. It's still available. You see? And we can hold it down again. And when we hold it down, we can again use it to further the process of what? Of that tikkun or redemption. In other words, every year that you keep Hanukkah, what do you keep it? How do you do that? You can only do it by observing the mitzvah. When you observe the mitzvah of that Chag, what that allows you to do is draw down that light again. That is the secret. What the Kodesh says, I will recreate that opportunity for you. But in order to take advantage of that opportunity, you must do the mitzvahs which are associated with that Chag. Hence on Pesach, what? That mitzvah is what? It's chametz and matzah. Don't eat any chametz and only matzah. You see, if you observe that and you do those things, you will again bring down that light of Gula. So whether you know it or not, and you really don't because it's a totally invisible process, every year that you keep Hanukkah the way it's supposed to be kept, there's an awe that comes down, there's a koyach that comes down, there's a hashpah that comes down, you see, which literally gives again also the koyach for a Gula. You see, it doesn't give the koyach of a full Gula because we're not nikah, we don't have redemption. But it's another fraction. It's another event that takes place, and even though we don't see it, there are events in the world which are specifically affected by that to bring Hanukkah closer to the ultimate Gula. So Pesach does that. That's the formula of a Chag. If that's the formula of a Chag, then the question is, what is Hanukkah? Obviously, when we celebrate Hanukkah, it is not the historical event we're talking about. It is not the historical tikkun we're talking about. It is what? It's the reactivation. It's the ability to recapture that tikkun that was once there and use it again for ourselves. That's what it means to celebrate Hanukkah. Really. Now, once we have that basic idea, it simply remains for us to understand what is that light. What is the tikkun? If the tikkun of Pesach is what? Is a light of redemption, of Gula, because that's what happens. What's the tikkun of Hanukkah? What do we establish by Hanukkah? That's what we have to discover. And once we know that, when you put on your Hanukkah light, and you understand it, when you have this kavanah, when you make the brachos, and you understand what the meaning of those brachos are, and what you're doing, you will really become privy to the inner nature of that awe, which is coming down, which is totally invisible, which has an enormous effect on Israel as a whole, and on you as an individual, even though you may not be aware of it. Golus. What does the word Golus mean? Exile. The Jews were exiled. They were exiled from the land of Israel. When? When was the first real Golus? In 586. They were exiled for 70 years and they were allowed to come back. But essentially, and then again they were exiled. What do we see? What we really see that in all the Golus in the Israel, the Jews have been dominated by 4 kingdoms and only 4 kingdoms. Now you may say that the Jews have been dominated by many more than 4 kingdoms. No, that's not true. Since the time of the Churban Bayis Rishon, there have been 4 kingdoms which have been dominated Israel. You see. And even though you cannot see these kingdoms now in terms of their goof, the body, the neshama of these 4 kingdoms still exists. And the neshama, or the spirit, and the koyah of these 4 kingdoms still exists to subjugate, dominate Israel when they have to be subjugated. What were those 4 kingdoms and why are there 4 kingdoms? That is a very deep study. It's an enormously deep study, and I'm going to only touch on it. The first kingdom, Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and Rome. We are now under the domination of Rome. You'll say, what Rome? I don't see any Romans anymore, except on TV, on the movies, you see. I don't see any Romans. That's not true. Because the spirit of Rome, or Essence, now exists in Christianity. How do we know this? Many ways. But if you really want to see this, just look into a church and see what their prayers are. They're in Latin, basically. Well, Latin was the language of the Romans. The Vatican is in Italy. It's in the seat of the old Roman Empire. In fact, the Pope is the Holy Roman Emperor. All of Christianity is essentially the spiritual heir to the power of Rome. And that's really what it is. That's what dominates the world, at least dominates our section of it. There are other sections. But the Jews, who are essentially under the domination of Rome, is under the domination of Christianity. And this has been the essential domination that we have experienced for the last 2,000 years. From one country to another, it's been mostly under the domination of Rome and its spiritual offshoots. These are the only four which are capable of dominating private Israel. But why are there four? And what is the difference between the four? Babylonia and Persia were kingdoms that represented one type of domination. Greece and Rome represented a different type of domination. But in order to understand this more carefully, you have to know a very curious fact about history. And I think I mentioned this a long time ago, but we have to go into it to some degree now. We all think that the human being, or the nature of human experience, has been the same throughout time. In other words, basically, you were the same kind of person that existed 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. The only difference is the culture was different, or the access to technology, or just the way they looked at life. But the thought processes, and the feeling processes, and the physical processes are essentially the same. That's what we assume. Correct? Yes, but that's not so. The truth of the matter is, although we cannot really see this, mankind has changed, literally, in terms of what his state of mind is. So that the mind of someone who lived in the time of the first temple is totally different from the mind of someone who lives now. Two different human beings. If you saw a person who lived at that time, you would literally not know him to be human. You see. Why would you know him to be human? Well, look at yourself. In the time of Babylonia, in the time of the first temple, there were 1 million prophets. What is a prophet? A prophet is someone who communicates with spirituality directly. This is a period called direct access. The neshamas of the people who lived at this time, from the time of Adam Rishon, the first man created, until the destruction of the first temple, or until the beginning of the second, those people who all lived had all one similar property. They can feel the neshamas directly. What does that mean to feel the neshama? What does that mean? They had a drive for spirituality. They literally hungered for it, like you hunger for Taibat HaGuf. You hunger for pleasure to the body. They hungered for ruchnius. Now you may say, well, I also hunger for ruchnius. You don't know what it means to hunger for ruchnius. You wake in the morning and you have this intense craving to daven to God, to learn, to be close to ruchnius. I doubt it. You see. These people woke up in the morning with that intense craving all the time. Which means that they felt a drive which we no longer feel. We don't have access to that drive. It's not in our consciousness. They had a drive to connect with ruchnius. Spirituality. I don't need to sit and study. I need to connect with a world which exists beyond the senses, which everyone knew existed. And they want to connect to that power. What do they feel when they connect to that power? They felt an incredible ecstatic state. An enormous ecstasy. You see. We don't have access to that experience whatsoever. There's very little in your life to even duplicate that kind of thing. That feeling no longer exists. That feeling, that drive, was taken away from man at the second temple. Prophecy, the ability to connect to God directly. Idol worship, the drive for these things are all gone. Why did those people worship idols? Do you think they were stupid? Do you think they just took some idol and they sat down and started worshipping it? You think that the ancient Jews were so smart and Moshe came up and said, you know, we think these idols are totally stupid. These Egyptian idols are totally idiotic. What are you doing bowing down to a stone with the head of a ram? What does that mean? So Moshe comes along and says, this is stupid. Let's daven, let's pray to a God who created everything. An invisible God. So the Egyptians would say, what do you mean? This is God. This stone. The stone with this ram face. That's God. Do you think that ancient Egyptian was stupid? Of course not. He knew that wasn't God. The people who built the pyramid and who had tremendous knowledge of many things, you think that they would be totally deprived or completely blind to something which is so obvious to retarded people today? That stones can't talk, they can't move, so how can they produce any kind of powerful thing? You ever wonder why these people chase idols? Well, yeah, you know what people say today? Yeah, well, these people were primitive, Neolithic, not far beyond cavemen. And since they were basically Neolithic or post-Neolithic man, they had basically primitive views of society, primitive views of religion. And they all were afraid of these ultimate powers, and they created these stones, and they thought that the powers were these stones, and these stones really could do something. And they worshipped stones and wood and animals and stuff like that, you see. But now that we have science and technology, we know what's best. We know, of course, the idiocy of this stuff. We have what's called modern man. Modern man with its high technology and its superior intellect. And those people were primitive man. There's an incredible mistake. No. The evolution is the opposite. Those people were advanced men. We are primitive. Yes. And you all look at me like astonishment. What am I talking about? You don't realize that man was at his height in those days. We are at our nadir. They were the zenith. How? How is that possible? Man is the construction of Guf and Neshama together. The essence of the power of a person lies in his neshama, not in his guf. His guf is like a suit of clothes that he schleps along with it, but it has its own desires and a certain presence in the neshama. But the real power of man, his real essence, his real koyah, is in the neshama. You see, the degree of primitiveness or advanced degree of man is indicated by the power of his neshama, not by the power of his guf. If you can feel your neshama very powerfully, and you can feel it talk to you, it's not visible to you, but you can feel it how, through drive, through certain types of stimuli, internal stimuli, which are different than physical stimuli. We all have physical stimuli. I'm talking about different set of drives. If they come from the neshama, but affect the mind, and the mind begins to feel certain things that are not related to the guf. It feels needs, which are not associated with physical. You see, that means that the person is in contact with his neshama. That's a very high person, because that's a person who's in contact with his roots, with his fundamental basis. A person who's no longer in contact with that, he's only in contact with his body. That's it. And he wants to replenish and simply to expand on his bodily desires, you see, and develop chokhmah and understanding simply to expand on it, you see. He creates objects and mechanisms and devices simply to give him more pleasure. But pleasure essentially is a physical thing, you see. We take all our chokhmah to expand our body. That's really what it is, to expand our sensations of body. That's a very low madriga as far as God is concerned, what man really is. If a million people can do something and start talking to God, and they can know things what will be in the future, and know things which are not revealed through chokhmah, through intellect, and they can know things about what will happen in the future, but what happens in different worlds and different things, and what determines history, and what the inner essence of the world is. You see, who is superior? Take the ancient Egyptians, stupid people, right? Let's see. Moshe came along and said, "Let my people go." You know, I'm going to turn the Nile into blood. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn the blood. Now, that's not a simple matter. How do you go take water and turn it to blood? That's a sharp trick. Even our best chemists can't do that. Moshe comes along and does it. He does it. What did the Mitzrayim say? What did the Egyptians say? Right? The high priest of Egypt looks and says, "Neat trick. No big deal. We can do it too." That's right. Moshe comes along and says, "You don't like this? I'll do something better. I'll take all the frogs, and the whole land of Egypt will be covered with frogs." The high priest, the Egyptian high priest, big deal. We can do that too. Third one, Kingdom. I'll cover the land of Egypt with light. Literally, everyone, so that you will not stop scratching. The high priest of Egypt. We can't do that. How do you do that? Where do you get the power from? That's the dialogue that took place. How do I know? Because the Torah says that in the third plague of Egypt, the Egyptians looked up when they saw the plague of rice and they said, "Esfara Timu." This is the finger of God. What's the finger of God? They realized that this is coming from a power they did not have access to. They could have turned the Nile to blood, and they could have brought up the frogs. They couldn't deal with light. They couldn't deal with the level of creature which is smaller than the certain lamp. They didn't have the power to access the insect world. But they could turn water to blood. Who's laughing at who? If you have a nation that knows how to turn water to blood, why is it important for them to know about electricity? Or about atomic energy? If you have a nation who can literally control physical reality and suspend many of the laws of nature, suspend the laws of nature, who is more advanced? The person who can suspend the laws of nature, or the one who can understand them and simply what? Expand on it and use it? Who is greater? I ask you, the creator or the engineer? Well, see, was it created? These people understood the laws of nature. You see, we don't understand the laws of nature. Only in the sense that we understand it, we use it. We can't transcend them because we don't know the spiritual power and force behind the physical law. You see, they knew. How did they know? Because man who lived at that time had access to his feelings of his neshama. Thus, at that time, they were prophets. Now that they had access to certain kirkas, when they worshipped idols, they weren't worshipping stone. They knew these things were stone, but they knew things about the powers, spiritual forces, what's called the spiritual forces of Tumah, or the spiritual forces what we used to call the dark side, or the Saphat. Because what the Bunyan did when he created the world was he created two sources of power that he both controls and generates. One is the Kurk of Kedusha, and the other is the Kurk of Tumah. Both are spiritual powers, you see. The greater power is the one of Kedusha, and even the Kurk of Tumah must come on to the Kurk of Kedusha, really. But as far as we're concerned, they're like two basic powers. The Jews were Chachomim, they were wise in the knowledge of the Kurk of Kedusha. When Moshe Rabbeinu came up and he filled the Nile of the blood, he was the Kurk of Kedusha. He was able to do this because he understood what was behind the law of water and blood. He understood the spiritual powers which create this. It was a simple matter for him to do it. The Egyptian high priests, they could also do it because they understood the thing behind it. Or they had drive towards what? To attach themselves, to create an affinity. What? To Ruchnis, the spirit, which is from the Tumah. That's called Avodah Zorah. Avodah Zorah, which is idol worship, is nothing more than the internal drive of a person towards spirituality, except that he allows himself to go to the negative spirituality. And when he does, he creates a stone. And through certain rules and certain chachmas that they had, which we no longer possess, because we have no idea what they did or how they did, he knew how to take that stone and literally draw out a real power, not from the stone, but somehow that ram's head. You see, that ram's head, you know, Amun-Ra, who we think is a stupid Egyptian god. You see, it's much more deeper than that. Amun-Ra, who's the ram's head, symbolizes the month of April, Nisan, because that's the sign of the zodiac. Which means that ram's head, Amun-Ra, was not just a stupid stone god, but really represented the power which came from the mazel of Nisan, or in the zodiac at that time, and they drew from the astronomical forces. It's a whole different thing. We don't know this. So we think they just made a god with a ram's head and that was the end of it. There was a whole chachma. There were manuals. There was a whole understanding of what they did. You see, I remember when I went to Egypt several years ago, and I went to the temple of Karnak, and in the back of the temple, they know from Egyptian, they know the archaeologists, essentially the structure of an Egyptian temple. And the essence of the whole temple, Karnak, is incredible. It's the size of a football field, maybe 2 football fields. It's an enormous structure. And the whole temple is really a series of steps going towards the back of the temple. And in the back of the temple is this little room. And they know that whatever went on in ancient Egypt went on in that little room. This is where the essence of the worship was. What did they do? Nobody knows. What? Nobody knows. No one has an idea. What did they do in this little room? Of course nobody knows. Because we don't have the ability to experience what they did, you see. We no longer have the drive to our words. We don't worship idols. But then again, we're no longer prophets either. You see. One for the other. When the Baruch took away the ability of the Jews to sense prophecy, he took away the Yitzhahara, or the seductive power of Avodah Zorah as well. You see, he took away the ability of people to literally access spirituality directly. When did he do that? He did that at this point in time. Babylonia and Persia were two nations that were able to what? Combat Israel in the fields of Ruchnius, direct access access itself. Babylonia was the greatest nation on earth in terms of the Kirk of Tumah of Avodah Zarah. They had the most understanding of how to use these forces. Because of the sins of the Jews, the Kirk of Tumah was greater than the Kirk of Kedusha at that time. Hence Babylonia was able to conquer Israel. And the same thing with Persia. You see, both of these nations said to the Jews, you have powers, we exceed. We have powers too. But we have stronger powers than you. Of course there is a God. Of course there's Ruchnius. No one denied these times that there was a God. Everyone knew there was a God on earth. Of course. But the question was, which God was stronger? And the Babylonian says, our God is stronger. I forget his name. You see, our God is stronger, not yours. And God allowed them to be superior. So what happened was, Babylonian and Persia, or the domination of these two kingdoms for the Jews, were adversaries in terms of power. But after that, after this period of time, the ability to access spirituality was lost, it was gone. God no longer allowed man to understand the things through his neshama. Now, if you want to reach truth, you've got to use your head. You've got to use chokmah, intellect. But intellect is a drop down, in a sense, you see. And that's what happened. Hence, the battle between the Jews and the Goyim, in terms of the Kedusha Tumah, no longer exists on a spiritual plane, but only on an intellectual plane. Enter Greece. Yes.
Was the knowledge that Persia and Babylon had higher than what Egypt had, or was it?
Hard to comment on that. I'm not very familiar with either of their houses. I would say that it was not.
The Egyptian Egypt.
Well, there's no question what. The Gemara says that not out of all when God gave out the power of Tumah to the world, 9/10 of that power was given to Egypt, and 1/10 was distributed in the rest of the world. So Egypt had 9/10 of the power of Tumah in their hands. That's how they were able to hold the Jews locked up for 210 years. Impure. Yeah, that's why. It's clearly Egypt was the quintessence of Tumah. Why was that? That's the picture. But that's a whole different story. Enter Greece. Now, obviously Greece represented a new battle, a new conflict. It wasn't a conflict of spirituality. It was a conflict of a different thing. It was a conflict of intellect. What am I talking about? What was the Grecian, the Hellenistic tradition? Essentially, the Hellenistic tradition had three basic concepts. The Greeks were the first one on earth, the first one to really begin to look at reality, physical reality, in terms of cause and effect. They began to study nature in terms of natural phenomena. In fact, the father of science was Thales of Miletus, who lived, strangely enough, in 580 BCE, which is an interesting thing. There's a reason why it started then. But the first Greeks, Pythagoras, Thales, Anaxagoras, these are the first ones that began to look at reality, right, and begin to study it. Why does this do what it does? But they didn't study it from its spiritual force. They had no idea how to figure that out. They studied from its physical nature, in terms of what you can observe, and what you can study and understand with the cup, with the head, with the intellect. And you had the first scientific attempt to understand Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Archimedes. The Greeks were the first one to attack the physical world as a physical world, not simply as an extension of a spiritual world. That was lost, because it was invisible. No one knew what that was anymore. It's a physical world. They attacked it, and they tried to understand it in physical terms. They saw reality as physical phenomena, which to be understood in terms of cause and effect relationships. What was the instrument? The head. The intellect. The human mind. It was the mind of man which is the instrument to understand this. For what purpose? For man's superiority. If the entire world lay now in physical phenomena, then who is important? Man. God is no more important. God is secondary. Because spirit no longer really exists. Spirit is not significant anymore. It's the human being which we worship. Hence, they created the Olympics to worship the human body. If you notice, back at all the great mythological characters, they weren't real gods in the old sense of the word. Egyptian mythology was not like the old idol worship. It was nothing more than human beings. If you look at all their gods, they were really human beings, just big human beings. flying around, doing all kinds of funny little things. You know? What?
Greek gods.
Greek gods. I'm talking about the Greek gods. Yes. You see. They weren't like the ancient Egyptian gods or the ancient Babylonian gods. That was a whole different area. The Greek gods were human beings, you see, who interacted with humans, and they had human foibles and human emotions. They chased women, and they fought with each other, and they killed each other. I mean, this is what really happened over here. These were Greek gods. They are nothing more than extensions or reflections of people. But man was to be worshipped, because the mind of man was to be worshipped, because the world was a physical world. Where's spirituality? What spirituality? It doesn't exist. Hence the Greeks were the first ones to say, forget about spirit, soul. We don't know what that means. We don't have any contact with that. It's the head, it's the cup, which is their thing now. And all of mankind from then on followed the Greek tradition. There are many historians who hold that after the Greeks, nothing else happened that's worthwhile in mankind or human history. You know that? And to a certain extent their life. Because the Greeks started the whole fundamental idea that if you want to control reality, if you want to be successful, you must understand the laws of nature and apply it and dominate it. And make yourself into the superior being. That's the Greek tradition. And that's what the Romans took over. That is all the nations, that's our tradition, the American tradition, all of it is an extension of Greek. All of science is based on the Greek tradition, not on the Babylonian tradition or the Egyptian tradition. You see, they started this concept. Hence the Jews for the first time met Greece. But when they met Greece, they met a new concept. But they themselves were different people. These weren't the Jews of old, who when they met Babylonia, it was spirit versus spirit. Adversary versus adversary. It was a new enemy here. Greece said, wait a minute, we're not competing with an adversary, we're not against you. Babylonia said to the Jews, you have spirituality, we have spirituality. Our spirituality is stronger than yours. You have power, we have power. Our power is stronger than yours. We are your antagonists. We are your adversaries. Greece said to the Jews, we have truth, you have nothing. What do you have? You have nothing. What is your Shita? Some ancient mystical thing that means nothing? You have to remember, in this period of time already, there was no more access to spirituality. You see. So what the Greeks said wasn't that you also have truth, but we have a greater truth. What the Greeks said is that we have truth and you have no truth whatsoever. We have the way to understand the world. The Hellenistic tradition is the way to understand reality. This is what makes man superior. God is a meaningless entity. He's an absolute meaningless variable. Like Laplace. No. Laplace, Simon Laplace said to Napoleon after he wrote his work, he wrote a very great work, Celeste Mécanique, which is celestial mechanics. And Napoleon took a look at it and said, this is an astounding work, but where is God in all this? Because he wrote a book that describes all the motions of the world based on Newtonian physics. And he described all the planetary motions and comets and so on. So Napoleon said to him, excuse me, Monsieur Laplace, where is God in all this? So Laplace said, God is an unnecessary variable. He's right, it is unnecessary. We've explained it all without God. God is not a truth anymore. Physics is a truth. That's what the Greeks said to the Jews. What is this thing you have heard of? What is that? Physics, metaphysics. These are the truths. Logic, the postulate analytics, the organon, Plato, the dialogue. This is the eminence. Geometry. This is the truth. You tell me it doesn't make sense. You see. That's what the Jews meant. And what happened was the Jews fell sway to it. Because they had lost their ability to access Ruchnias. So they began to fall under. And they began to feel that the Greek tradition was the truth. That was a superior tradition. It was the truth about reality. You see. That's what the thing was. This is essentially, Greece was not an adversary to the Jews. It was a competitor. They competed for what? Not for domination, but for the truth. Who would be the bearer of the MS? That's a much more nobler thing, isn't it? Than simply who would breed who in terms of who's more stronger. It's much higher. Yes.
Was this the punishment for the Jews that because of this whole cataclysmic event, that now they met the Greeks and they were like further away from God because of the sins that they'd done previously?
Yes. It is, but that aspect is a bigger keep up. I don't want to go into that. That's the whole, we could describe a progression. It was obviously there was a further punishment. Ever since the Greeks, before the Greeks, no goy came over to a Jew and said, we are true and you are false. That's no goy said that. The goy said, my God is bigger than your God. My God is stronger than your God. That's what the goy said. You see. But since the Greeks, the goy goes over to a Jew and says, you're a liar, I'm true. Whether it's a Greek or Roman or it's a Christian or Muslim, they go and says, your religion is false. We have the truth. You see. That statement is a statement of a competitor. The statement before these guys came along, the Babylonian Persia, was a statement of an adversary. A whole different ballgame. Hence the Jews met a new enemy that they have never seen before. And they didn't know how to deal with it. What did they do? Comes Matthew, and that's what Antiochus tried to do. By creating the worship of Zeus in the temple, it wasn't Zeus, it was the Hellenistic tradition. It was the belief in man's power, in man's intellect, in the ability to control and manipulate nature, in the regularity of nature, in natural law. You see. And the disbelief in spirituality, or that which transcends it, it was a belief in logic. What did the Jews do? Big trouble. So Matthew and the son, Matthew said, this is false. Matthew said to the Jews, wait a minute, you don't understand. What was the catch here? But Matthew said the following. What was his argument? He says, you don't understand. You think that the Hellenistic tradition, you think that it's work in logic and science is greater than the Torah? It makes me incredible to think. Why? He said the following. Look at the world. In the world, even before, they believed in powers of good and powers of evil. But we all know, especially from our Shir last week, there is only one God, one power, who dominates all powers, and they're nothing more than expressions of His will to bring His ultimate purpose. You see, wait a minute. Good, evil, two different forces. Two different forces must have two different origins. How do you know that? Logic. Logic says that, doesn't it? Two different powers, two different forces must have two different origins. Hence, logic will tell you that if you look at reality, and you look at the good events and the bad events of reality, there must be two different gods, you see. But the Torah says there's one God behind both. But how can you have one power behind two opposite forces? How can you have good and evil, opposite forces, being used by one God to produce one purpose? That's insane. What Matthew says, that's the essence of the Torah. The essence of the Torah is that the Torah is beyond logic, it transcends logic. Because the Torah is based on the yichud of God. It is based on His eternal unity. It is based on His absolute control of all forces and the ability to use these things, you see, and control and create these things. Even though they appear to be antithetical, it's really one force coming from one thing. That's what the Torah says. In Greek tradition, it's reversed. You have good gods and bad gods, good powers and bad powers, and so on. So that's what Matthew is saying. You're making a drastic mistake. The Torah says that there's more than natural phenomena. There's more than logic, you see. That there exists a level of yichud, there's a level of awe, there's a level of light which transcends everything. And not only that, that you, the Jews, are dependent on that light. In other words, all the nations of the world, if they want to do something, accomplish something, they must use rational phenomena. They must use the laws of the world. But you don't have to use that. You simply have to daven the Baruch. Pray to Him. You can suspend these things, and you can depend on forces which are beyond logical forces and natural forces. For example, even though you're a Russia, and as a Russia, logic says, well, the person who's evil gets evil. Evil begets evil, and good begets good, right? That's justice. But wait, you can go to the Baruch and beg Him for mercy. And what it is you can get Him to suspend that which justice would normally demand. And you can get Him, the Baruch, to attempt to work with you, to reestablish yourself, you see, and correct your ways, where justice is not concerned. Justice is not concerned with establishing ways. Mercy is. Justice is simply concerned with good to the good and evil to the evil. If you do bad, you get bad. You get punished. If you do good, you get a reward. That's all. Justice is not concerned with mercy. But you can go to God and expect Him, and you can ask Him to transcend the law of justice, strict din, and you can ask Him to transcend the law of logic itself in terms of these forces. And He will do this for you. Why? Because that's what the Torah is. The Torah is a life which transcends logic and intellect itself. It transcends the Hellenistic tradition. They are circumscribed to this. They believe in this because this is all they have. Your Torah is not inferior, it is higher, it's far beyond that, you see. That's what Master Joe told them. Like it says, these are with chariots and these are with horses. And we Jews would simply what? Mention or call on the name of God. You can bring your armies, you can bring whatever you want, whatever forces. You can bring every technological force you want. But if the Bonisham helps me, he will help me in a way which will undo every one of your technological forces. Look at ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was the mightiest kingdom on earth. There was nothing that equaled it in any sense of the word, ancient Egypt. And they had in their captivity the Jews who were a much smaller minority. How could these Jews rebel against ancient Egypt? By laws of normal reality. It was impossible. What the Bonisham did was, Bonisham showed that there's a higher strength than what you think is reality, or what you think will be logical. And I will redeem you, even against the laws of nature itself. That's what Master Sheo told the Jews, you see. And Master Sheo said to them, you want to see that this thing works? I'll show you this works. You want to see it? Just follow what I say. Fight anti-us. Refuse to acknowledge his Hellenistic position. Be moist nefesh. Even if it means that he's going to kill some of you. You must give up your life by what is done. It's one of the mitzvahs that you have to give up your life for. Do that, and you will see, if you show the Bonisham that you believe in his yichud, that you believe in the force beyond logic, beyond natural law, he will use that very self-same force to redeem you. You see. What do? They did what Master said. And they battled the Greeks, they withheld against the Hellenistic tradition. They say, this Hellenistic tradition is false. It is the Torah that's true. And they fought him, and they won. How did they win? Well, that's what the thing says. That's what it says here. How? Who won? The mighty in the hands of the weak. The many in the hands of the few. But wait a minute. How could the mighty fall at the hands of the weak, or the many at the hands of the few? Who was bigger? The Syrian Greek army or the Jewish army? I think the Syrian army outnumbered the Jews many, many times. Many times. And they were much more powerful warriors. But who won the battle? The Jews won the battle. This was the miracle. This is the essence of Hanukkah. The essence of Hanukkah was that a handful of Jews beat the entire Syrian Greek army. That's the greatest nest of all. You see. But that nest which God did to the Jews, forget about the nature of the candles. I'm talking about the battle itself. The greatest nature was the battle. When the Bonisham said, I will allow the weak and the few to destroy the mighty and the many and the multitude. You see. That's what the Bonisham said. I will give you the strength. Why? Because the Bonisham says, I will do as you have done. Just as you have denied the law of rationality and the law of the Hellenistic tradition and the law of logic and reality, where reality says that the few cannot beat the mighty. Just as you have done that and you have turned to me for help, I will demonstrate that that which you have turned to is true. I will allow you to win in exactly that same way. In Hebrew that's called Mida Keneged Mida. You see, principle for principle. If you depend on me, if you hold on to my mitzvah yichud, if you hold on to what? To the fact that the Torah transcends the laws of reality, and that I control what happens, if you hold on to me, then I will transcend the laws of reality. And I will allow a small army to defeat the mighty armies of the Greeks and the Syrians. And that's exactly what happened. That's why when Chazal came along and they said this, that's why all that stuff will be mentioned. Because that was the whole thing. This is the essence of the whole what? Seduction of Greece, the Hellenistic tradition, and this was the Jews' answer. We don't accept it. And this was the Jews' victory. We have won against your logic. We, the few and the weak, have defeated the mighty and the many. You see, this is the nature of Hanukkah. If it would have stopped there, that would have been fine. And this was so momentous, because this was the first time that the Jews met a competitive Greece, where the Goy said, what you're saying is not true, what I'm saying is true. And the Jews met it straight on, and they defeated it. They refused to acknowledge it. This was the first type of enemy they ever saw in this way. You see. So that's why the Chachamim said, that's why we enact this Chag. We enact this Chag to commemorate, not in the star for them, you see, but to commemorate, or to what? To remember an achievement of the Jews, the first of its type in its time. And when we commemorate that, we just don't commemorate even the Tikkun, historically. But just like the neshamas by going against the Hellenistic tradition. They brought down a new light in the world, an enormously powerful light that allowed them to sustain for many, many years on, and brought aspects of the Gula. When we keep Hanukkah, we bring down that same light. And by God, we need that light. Because if you think they had problems with the Hellenistic traditions, we have problems a thousand more fold with the what? With the high-tech society out there. If you think they have problems with natural law, we have problems with what? With all cosmic law over here. We have the full force of science and technology against us that says, God, forget about God. It's all reason. It's what man can do, what man can dominate. That's what our society tells us every second. Almost every object in this room tells us man's superiority, man's domination. Man's inventive genius. And it tells us that man is God. That's what everything in this room tells us. That's what everything out there in the street tells us. That's what all America tells us. That's what the whole world shouts. The world shouts that man is God. And man's achievement is supreme. That's Greece exponentially expanded. You see. So if you think that we need this light like we've never lived before. Hence Hanukkah for us is more important in many ways than Pesach was. Because Hanukkah is relevant. It is incredibly relevant to us. It is the essence of the type of tikkun that we must establish for ourselves to fight against this incredible, awesome wave of human what? Of human intellect and human achievement, which is really a figment of their imagination. You see, it's another illusion. It's a deception. Behind that, the power of God moves it to create this incredible deception to see which Jews are going to hang on and which are going to fall by the wayside. It is a test. You see, when you keep Hanukkah and you do that, that is the essence of the test. You're saying to the Shalom, it is the Torah which is beyond the mind of man. It is God's Spirit and the Torah which is the essence of all what? Of all the laws of the world. Not science, logic, and man. You see, it's a whole different dimension. This is the essence of the thing. The lights, well, they came in there, right? And they came into the temple, and they lit for light for 1 day, and it lasted 8 days. What was that? Well, you know what the menorah is? In the Beit HaMikdash, there were many different instruments. There were many different pieces. There was a menorah, there was a shulchan, there was an altar, there were different things. Each one of these things symbolized a different concept or a different aspect of Torah. You see, you know what symbolized the Torah itself? The menorah. The menorah was the symbol of the light of Torah itself, you see. So when they came along and they took 1 candle of oil and they put it there and it lasted 8 days, what was the big deal? What? That there was a miracle? But that's the essence of Torah. The essence of Torah that it transcends natural law. So what's the big deal that one container of light, which naturally should only last 1 day, lasts 8, if that's the essence of Torah itself? You see? In other words, the miracle of the candle was nothing more than a repetition of the fact that the Jews defeated the Greeks in much smaller number. You see? That's why there's no mention of it. There's no mention of the lights. Because it's a repetition of one miracle on the other. But the essence of the miracle lay in the defeat, in the military defeat. You see? Which by all military terms is impossible. Or would have been impossible. The fact that the menorah lasted 8 days on what? On a supply of 1 day was nothing. That's what the Beit HaMikdash is all about, you see. That's what the menorah is all about. That's the essence of Torah. When they came in this house, they weren't that surprised. What? If a couple of guys can defeat the whole Syrian army, what's the big deal about one pot lasting 8 days? You see? That's why that's not mentioned at all. But how do we celebrate? How do we commemorate? Or how do we really recapture that light of Hanukkah, that tikkun, into ourselves so that we can go on and what? And fight and go against the incredible mass of illusion which is constantly eating our heads by the light of Hanukkah. Because even though the essence of the miracle took place in what? In the war, but the symbol of that, which is the Torah, is in the menorah. And when we light the menorah 1 day each one at a time, we acknowledge the superiority of Torah over logic, you see, over physical law, and the superiority of God over man, and the spirit over body. This is the essence of Hanukkah. So what we see in Hanukkah is a message. Well, not a message. I don't want it to sound like a sermon. But in essence, what it essentially is, it's an idea. But it's not an idea. It's an avodah. It's a work. It's an avodah that you can all capture. When you put on the Hanukkah, you think of these thoughts, these concepts. That's an avodah. When you do that, you actually connect to the all that's coming down. There's no commemoration here. There's nothing to remember. There's no historical dedications here. This is totally within. These are good concepts. And these are What we are doing is again taking down an ore which came down a long time ago, which we have and which we need, which actually does a tremendous amount. You see, you say, well, how? What's the big deal if I light Hanukkah? What's that going to do for me? You don't know. You see, when you light Hanukkah and you keep that mitzvah, you keep it well, and you understand that. 2 months from now, when you're going down and you suddenly come confronted with a very strong Nisayan, a test, you see, which in some way involves what your ability is to recognize who the true force is, God or man, you see. Subtly, what you don't realize, and suddenly you don't know what to do. You don't know if you should give in to this high-tech concept or try and take the spirit of it, and you're just grappling. Suddenly, a light comes from you and it says, of course, what am I arguing about? Where does that light come from? That light is the residue of the light that you brought down on Hanukkah to help you the entire year against this incredible struggle called civilization. You see, that's where Hanukkah helps you. It's not a commemoration, it's not a dedication, it's not a memory for everything. It is a living instrument now that can really help you do something, you see, about every day of your life now in a way that you cannot see. Because the Buddha says, you simply open me up this. Just take one step, you see. Give me one step, and I will take you 1,000 miles. That's what the Buddha says. You like the Hanukkah. Show me that you understand. Show me what you do in the Hanukkah. And you will see, when it comes to time, and you have an assignment, and you can't battle it, you don't know what to do, I will send you the force and the power that you need to overcome it. And where will it come from? From the Hanukkah itself. Just like, where did the Jews get the power to defeat the Syrian Greeks, these mighty armies, and they were only a small handful? Because suddenly they turned around and said, "Fui" on the Hellenistic tradition. It is wrong. It is absolutely wrong. We go, the mind of the Teva, you see. We call on God. We call on that which transcends din, on that which transcends logic, on that which transcends natural law. And the Buddha says, you call on me with this belief, then I will come to you, and I will prove to you that you have done right. I will allow you to win, not just to win, but I will allow you to win against natural law, against logic, against the mighty arm of the Greeks, against military concepts and military strategy. You will win, because as you have done, just as you indicated your trust in me, I will show you that your trust was absolutely correct. This is basically the key idea of Hanukkah. And this is true of all the Chagim, each one in its own way and its own idea.